Okay, so we're getting ready to cut our machine. Like I said before in our previous video, just in case you didn't watch it, fast forward, power right through because you don't care. That's always awesome. You should watch them all so you know what's going on. Be prepared, damn it. Anyway, so what I'm trying to say is we are doing our machines at half size. Actually, they're a little smaller than half size, but the reason why we're doing that is so that we can kind of show everything and get intimate about the details on how it works. We can show you up close how it works. All the techniques, all the things that we're going to be doing here are going to be able to translate to any size, shape, whatever it is that you're doing here. We're here to show you the techniques, not the end result. We will show you the end result, but it's all about how we do it and get started. So we're going to cheat a little bit on the design that I had from before. I'll show you that layout as soon as we have these pieces cut, but I'm going to pre-cut my little pieces of my profile off of this. Right now we're going to cut two. We're going to draw and design our profile in the second half of this video, and then we'll cut it out after. So yeah, we're getting ready to cut. Let's make it roll. Okay, so now we're down to a couple pieces cut. What we're doing is what I showed you in the previous video. So that is a 4x8 sheet representation. So these are our two profiles, so you can see how small it's going to be. It's going to be probably a third the size of one of our regular arcade machines, so it's at about 5.5 feet tall. This is going to be less than 4 feet tall, and it's going to be about 16.5 inches wide. Like I said before, all the techniques that we do on this are going to be transferable to any size, shape, doesn't matter. So we'll go over all that with you, and I am going to get started on the drawing process. Okay, so now it's, I'm a little far away, so the audio might be a little bit odd, but basically in the end, any piece of measuring device, tool, whatever you can find, the better. Something like a yardstick or a meter stick or a straight edge is going to be your best friend on this. You can see these things that really have nothing to do with drawing or setting it up. What I'm actually going to be using them for is to give me rounded edges. Obviously, if I measure this out, you're going to be sitting there going, okay, well, that's a 2.5 inch radius. All right, so around that corner, I'm going to give myself a 2.5 inch radius in any of these corners. Obviously, this is like a 6 inch, 4 inch, 4.5 to 5 right here. So I'm going to play around with those. I'm going to do them on the fly while I'm doing it till I get something that I like. Make sure you have an eraser or something to do this on, just in case you screw something up and go from there. Do want to point out before I'm actually going hard on this is that we are doing this on the MDF first because it is the easiest substrate to use for sanding and manipulating and getting the way you want it. So when we're actually going to be using this profile when it's all cut out as a template for all the other profiles. So you'll get to see how that all comes to fruition, but for now I'm going to start drawing, and I will give you the full overview when I'm all done. Okay, so I am going to give you the quick little flyby of what I drew here. Okay, so my measurements are my measurements. You're gonna change yours to whatever you're gonna want them to be. This is my design and my profile. This is kind of proprietary to Retroactive Arcade for one of our Origin machines. We're just making a small version of it. You can see how basically I just have line points, but what I really want to point out on here is accuracy is key. The straighter the better. The nicer your lines, the better. It's going to be easier and clearer for you to follow. But as you can see, like here and along the back, I have no lines along the back and along my bottom, and then where I have a straight edge on the front here. I'm trying to cheat as much as I possibly can to have straight edges, okay? So you don't want to have the least amount of edges to cut. That's why we cut this chunk off of our sheet before we drew on it, okay? So we'll just cut away the other pieces with the jig saw, and then we have less that we have to sand and make sure that's true and straight. We might even cheat a little bit more and cut these straight lines here, either through the table saw over there, or we might use a skill saw even, depending on how brave we feel like being. But we're gonna show you all those different techniques. So I might do all of those things on this piece, just so that you can see that. So moving forward, getting on to cutting. All right, so this is going to be technique number one for our saw for one of our first cuts. We're just gonna show you parts of these cuts. With these three techniques that I'm going to show you, you're going to have to use at least two of them to complete your cuts around the edges of this. One is, if you have a table saw, obviously that's going to give you the straightest cut that you can possibly get. But what you're going to want to do, and we're only going to do it for just this part on this line that's right here. So we're just going to go up to here. Now, what you have to account for is, obviously your saw is round. So when you get to this point here, you don't want to have the top of the blade coming through to that point. Otherwise, you're going to gouge past your intended cut on the opposite side, and then you're going to have to use like wood filler and that type of a thing. So we're going to stop the blade probably a good 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch before we get to this mark here. And then we'll finish the rest off with a jig saw there. So this is just to get the straightest cut possible so that we're not worrying about our finishes on the end of everything. Because you'll see once we cut these things out with the jig saw, we're going to have to actually use like a chisel and or sanding tools to get into this corner. And then it's not only time consuming, it's also hard to do. So you don't want to go too far with that. So we're going to cut this here. We've already measured out our distance in our saw between here and here, so we're going to move forward with that and give it a cut. Okay, so like you saw, he turned the saw off before he pulled the workpiece out. You definitely want to be doing that type of a process. It's always safety first. Make sure you're wearing your PPE and all that as well. Take care on what you're doing and don't get that little kickback. We'll move on to the next cut. Okay, so I've moved this over to the other side of our table here. Obviously, you know, we have our edge. We're gonna use a skill saw to get this part of our cut on this angle. We're gonna freehand that. We're gonna freehand a few other things. You might not feel confident in that. Feel free by any means to just use the jig saw on these lines, but I want to show you exactly the reason why we wanted to use the table saw for these straight cuts and why you want to do something like that. You can see, try to get the shadow out of the way here. You can see my line. So I drew it, I was confident in my line, and I was obviously off. So my measurement from the edge here to that dot and the edge here to where I started my line was off. The actual table saw is straight. So if I would have cut that and I would have drew everything to that line, I wouldn't have been square. I mean, and then when you're in your end product, when you're building this, then your cabinet technically isn't going to be 100% square. This being your first project doing this, you're probably going to run into those things anyway. Don't be disheartened by that. Just go ahead and make it work. Nobody's going to notice a small little discrepancy like that with the naked eye when the whole machine is finished. So don't beat yourself up over it. But if you can get away from doing that, then that's definitely what you want to do. We've also clamped this thing to our table. You're going to want to find something to hold it down, especially if you're going to be pushing with 2 hands on a skill saw. It's really hard to use a skill saw with 1 hand when you're trying to get some actual precision. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to cut this. So right now he's just setting up the depth on the saw itself so that we don't go too far down. You want to use the teeth. You don't need to have, you know, 1 inch, 2 inches of the saw blade coming through the other side. As well as with this, he's only going to go till he's about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch away from the actual angle that we've cut there. Again, let the blade stop in the material. You can see that he's gone just through it, like just barely gone through it. And we are good to go. So the rest of that we will do with a jigsaw. All right, so we got our jigsaw out, we're ready to rock. You can see on this side, I just want to make sure that we're clear, is this side we went a little bit further, like close to the line, or as close to that line as possible. We accounted for the line that I was off and not looking at the one that I drew. That's what we're paying attention to. We went a little bit further on this side because the blade is rotating the opposite way. So now on the bottom, we are technically about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch away from the edge like we are at the top here. Where on the bottom of this one, we're going to be very close to the edge of that. So we're not actually cutting out a ton of material here. So moving forward, we'll just do this jigsaw and I'll show you what the actual cut on the inside looks like so you can see the difference in the blades. Again, let the blade stop in the material before moving it out. You don't want any kickback. Now you're going to need to keep your hand on that material. Obviously you don't want it to just fall out. You don't want it to pinch the blade and do all that fun stuff. And then you can see the imperfections in here, okay? So you see that round part with the blade where it kind of came up and it came right to our edge there where we want to be, okay? This being MDF, it'll be fairly easy to sand this out, and then all we have to do to deal with our focus is from here to here for sanding now, all the way up to where our corner is going to be. This straight edge here and this straight edge here are pretty much finished already. We don't have to actually do much more than a little pass with the orbital sander on there, and then you'll see how we'll break the edge and do some other stuff there, and I'll walk you through all that at the time. But we will show you how we're gonna smooth this out and make it look all nice. Okay, we're moving on to using the skill saw for the top part up here. Just for these straight lines. Any of the straight lines, we use a skill saw or a table saw. These angles are gonna be a bit of a pain in the butt to get going on a table saw. So if you're not experienced on a table saw and you don't actually have like a little kind of floating table to set your angles with on this, then I would suggest using an actual skill saw and do it by hand than by doing it on your table saw, because the angles will give you some sort of kickback and it'll be really hard to work with. Moving on to the skill saw. All right, so we're moving on to the table saw portion of things. So I want you to see our little setup here. So we have our piece there and we're hanging off the table here about 1.5 feet. So what's going to happen here is he's on this side, and normally you probably feel a lot more comfortable to cut from this side and come across. What's going to happen is then turn the saw over. So then when the saw's there, the saw's in the way of your line. You might be able to see it a little bit better coming through here, and it gives you a lot more stability if you use the wider part of saw on your actual substrate that you're going to be keeping instead of it falling off on that side. if you're experienced with your skill saw, you're going to find that it's going to give you a better line if you cut from the other side. So if you're inexperienced, I would strongly suggest from going on this one. If you cut a millimeter inside and that type of thing, then I mean, it is what it is. You can just adjust for it while you're building your thing. If you're really worried about it, then I would cut your line just like a millimeter or two past your drawn line, and then sand it down to the line that you want there. The only problem is when you're sanding all that stuff, you get like this wavy line, and you don't want that. So that's why we use things like the skill saw and the table saw to get you as straight a line as possible on those straight edges. A lot of people online aren't showing you that. There's no like kind of a cheat for that with them. They just do the jigsaw all the way around, and then if you actually, the camera won't pick it up as much, but you'll get that weird wavy line on it. I will do my best to show that if we get that on here so that you can stay away from it, but when we do these skill saw and the table saw, you don't get that. So he's going to cut from the other side just because we have a little more experience, but it doesn't matter which direction you cut it from. This one just gives you a lot less surface area on the saw right here. You can see it's only like 2 inches of surface on there so that the actual saw can wobble on you. But with experience with it, it will give you a way better cut. All right, now to the other side. Okay, you can see a little bit of a nick on the end here. That's easy to sand off, especially with MDF. It's no big deal. You can actually take a chisel or whatever if you want to. But you can also see that he took his time while he's going through there. It gives you a little bit of this kind of like burny bit there if you move or have any increments of movement and wobble in your blade, which is fine because we just sand that right out. So don't worry about any of that stuff. But you can see that now we have these nice flush straight cuts. So what we're trying to do is get rid of that waviness before we even start with stuff. So now we're going to move on. We're going to cut out our last little section here with the jigsaw, and we'll show you how that all works too. Okay, so we're going to do a little slight change up here. I know in the last little segment there I said that we were going to go heavy with the jigsaw for this. Professionally doing these things for a while, you really want to stay away from using a jigsaw when you're doing straight lines. They're really, really, really hard to buff out, get or sand out, and do all that stuff. You basically need to, nail something or glue something across there and then hit it with a router to get a perfectly straight line. It's almost impossible to sand it out unless you're a real pro. So we're going to show you another technique. It's a little bit on the dangerous side. It's a little harder to do. But you can choose to do it if you want, depending on your skill set. But as it sits, we're just going to do a skill saw drop in. So we just drop in the line. So we look at it. So now what you have is you have most of your line cut already. Okay, you can probably see right through there. There's usually, if you set your depth for your saw, you're not going to have too much danger coming through on the bottom for you. But this one here, this technique doing this, you're going to need to hold it pretty steady, have a little bit of confidence, don't have yourself hanging over your project too far by any means. You want to make sure that you're stable as well as the material that you're cutting into. If you're not confident with this, then you can just follow what we're doing here with the jigsaw and do as I said prior. It's just going to make your life a lot easier if you can do it this way. At least we're not getting you to run a CNC here, so no worries. Now also, depending on your comfort level and all that stuff, you saw him cut that straight off. You could have done that at any time. And then you can just sand that other corner and stuff off there. So yeah, it's up to you. He just felt like using the saw to do it. We're gonna have to sand a bit on there as well. But at least you can kind of see, let's get in there. See the precision kind of a cut there where we dropped it in. See, it's got that little bit of a burn. That's going to be so much easier to sand. Doesn't look like it, but it will. MDF is a breeze to sand here. So, followed the line pretty close. Don't have much prep to do on this one. That's what you want. All right, we're moving on to sanding. Shablammy. So what we're doing here is we're getting ready to sand. So we got our orbital sander, we got 120 grit sandpaper on here. I'm gonna go over what we're gonna do quick here because this is actually gonna go by really fast. This cutout turned out really nice. Like I said, with all these little cheats that we did using the straight edges and stuff on the actual piece, and when we cut the piece width from here to here, we made sure that that was the size that we were going to go with. So there's lots of little things you can do if you're really prepared for your project to cheat along the way. And we also tried to give it the least amount of angles as possible. That'll help you in your build process later. If you want to get creative and go crazy all out first out of the gate, you're going to be you know, all the power to you. But you know, if you're just learning and stuff, stay with something simple first and then move up the ladder with your knowledge base and stuff. You know, you kind of get the bug for building these things after a while, so usually you're not just doing one. It sounds like it in the beginning, but no, it doesn't always end up that way. So what we're going to do is we're just going to barely touch the surface on the front here. Our back surface, or our back and bottom surface down here, we're not going to touch that yet, because this piece we want to make almost as perfect as possible, because we're going to use it as our template to cut all of our other pieces for two full machines. Okay, so this could end up being a left or right piece right now, and it can be whatever. So we're going to just sand the places that we need to, and I'll go through that with you in real time. Okay, so that's really all it took. Pretty straightforward when you take your time to cut it properly and use the right tools and you do it in the right way. Prep time shouldn't take that long. Now this isn't 100% picture perfect. Might touch this up off camera here before I set myself up to do the whole template action. Like this corner here, I'd like it maybe a little bit sharper, so maybe we'll get into that with a chisel here. But basically in the end, you can see how MDF will kind of conform to you. Now, there's another thing that we do later on. This piece being a template, we can go ahead and chisel this while I'm talking here. So what you want to do with MDF and even plywood would be, it's called breaking the edges. So what you want to do is take your sander or sanding block and do like a 45-degree angle along the edge here on both sides and that type of a thing. But since this is our template piece, I want it to be as rigid as possible because we're going to be using a router bit with a bearing to go down the edges of this. So you don't want to round it out and do all that stuff because then you'll get inconsistencies down throughout it. You don't want that. So as you can see, we're chiseling out that corner to give it a nice little angle there so that you didn't get that roundness from the sander itself. But you could also see how fast you can sand it, and if you press too hard, you'll get weird ripples in your project. We didn't get that here, so I was hoping that maybe we would have a little bit of an issue with it so that we could show it to you, but you'll know it as soon as you see it, I'll tell you right now. So just a quick overview, and we're moving on to the template part of things. Voila.